I originally got interested in fantasy at a very early age. My parents were great cinema goers in the early days, in the 20s, and they used to take me to these unusual pictures like Metropolis, The Lost World, when I was about 3 or 4, and I think that started it. I was fascinated with the unusual. My mother got me a set of wonder books, and that showed trips to Mars and Saturn and various other planets along with mythology. I always preferred the past rather than the future. I think that's more romantic. The future is mostly silver rocket ships and explosions, each character trying to blow the other out of the universe, and it never appealed to me that much. The past appealed to me much more. When I first started out, monsters were the in thing in the 50s, and
tus trailers, visita mi canal.
Destruction, disasters, and were popular in those days. And I got rather tired of destroying cities. I destroyed New York with the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. I destroyed San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge with a giant octopus, and that gets rather repetitious. I always wanted to animate a skeleton. I felt that if you had James Bond or somebody like that fighting a skeleton, it would be laughable. But if you had a mythological character, such as Sinbad, who represents the epitome of adventure, you could accept him dueling. So the first drawing I made was a skeleton on a staircase fighting Sinbad. And that started the seventh voyage of Sinbad. And of course the next step was Greek mythology. They always talked about the mythological creatures, but you never saw them on the screen. So I was determined to put these things on the screen, that you would see the Cyclops, and he wouldn't be just a Greek wrestler with an eye glued in the middle of his forehead.
The gods of Olympus are mysterious, and their motives are erratic.
Every legend has to be modified, I feel. You can't just take the story as it is, because they're rather fragmented. When Clash of the Titans came along, that was originally Beverly's basic idea, because he was a scholar of mythology. He lived in the Greek islands for a while, and he always wanted to put Perseus and Andromeda on the screen. So when he approached Charles and myself, we jumped at the idea. The creatures were incorporated in the story in the original legends. So I designed certain scenes and he wrote them in the script. Beverly had to tie them all together along with my drawings and concepts of new sequences so that the whole picture made sense and could hold an audience for an hour and a half. It was a great chance to put the best of mythology, I thought, on the screen.
Good deeds cannot atone for one murder.
That was the first time we really had what you'd call star names in our film. Who else could play Zeus but Laurence Olivier? He has the authority, even though he was quite ill at the time.
Destroy Argos!
Then, of course, we had Claire Bloom, and we had Maggie Smith, who played Thetis. They all were beautifully cast. It was a delight to work with Burgess Meredith. He helped carry the picture along with his vitality, I think. Originally, they wanted a British actor, but then they didn't want the film to look all British, so they cast an American in the role, and Burgess fit the role perfectly. I think Harry Hamlin did a very good job. He had to work with these British actors, all very prominent in the show business world, and I think he did a wonderful job as Perseus. And Judy Bowker had that wonderful innocent character about her that fit the role of Andromeda.
Tus trailers, visita mi canal.
You can't keep using Grand Canyon as a lost island or the Malibu Beach as a lost island. It's too familiar. Television uses it up so rapidly. That was one reason Charles and I moved over to Europe and made our center of action in England, was because it was so close to unusual locations. The opening of the film was photographed at Cornwall. We had to wait, of course, for the weatherman to declare that there's going to be a storm, because we wanted a violent sea in the background. So we had to wait several weeks before nature whipped up this storm that we could send the cast down there quickly and have them photograph the opening sequence. For the walled city, we used Malta, a certain section right on the coastline, for the flood scenes that were in the first part of the picture. We used a number of locations in Spain. One was Antequera, which is near Granada. It had some unusual rock formations that you seldom see on the screen. So that was very important to our film, particularly for the Stygian Witches sequence. We wanted to get some of Medusa's temples, and we had shot in that area for Jason and the Argonauts, but in a different way. And so we went back to Paestum in southern Italy to shoot the Medusa sequence, the exteriors. And we used the temple as Medusa's lair, combined with some miniatures as well. And then, of course, a two-headed dog was involved. And when they descended into the basement of the temples, we used a set located in Malta. So it all fit together quite well. The remainder of the film, after our location shooting, was shot, of course, at Pinewood Studios, where we had to stage parts of the flood sequence. We had to stage the interiors of all the temples, and along with mats and double exposures. But it was a delight to work there, and particularly a delight to go to all these exotic locations to get the proper atmosphere of the whole picture into that Greek period of which we were working. I've always felt, and Charles Schneer felt as well, that music is so very important to the films that we made. 50% of the film's value was in the emphasis of the audio with the visual. And that's almost forgotten today in many cases. We've had the good fortune of having many wonderful composers score our films. Lawrence Rosenthal scored Clash of the Titans, and he did a different type of score than our other films. Very romantic score. A wonderful sequence where they cross the river Styx. A very original music, and I've always been intrigued with that score as well.
Visita mi canal.
I get many fan letters from young people who say that our films influence their life, influence them growing up. And it's a delight to know that we made more than just an hour of entertainment. Dennis Muren and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Mr. Cameron, James Cameron, all say that our pictures, when they grew up, affected their wanting to get into the film business. So I'm grateful that our pictures have influenced this snowball. I was so highly influenced by Willis O'Brien. and of course by Gustave Doré as well, who was a French illustrator. And now I see the snowball moving on, accumulating more, and finally there's so many people today in the special effect field that have grown up on our films and feel, they write me and tell me that it affected them enormously. So that is a good feeling. The cinema was made for fantasy rather than normal type of stories, mundane stories. It gives you a feeling of wonder, for one thing. It stimulates the imagination. And I think adults like fantasy as well as children. Most people feel it's rather childish to have an imagination. I don't agree with that. I think you should go through life and imagine the very best.